First, I want to say that we're joined by, Drew Kopp, and Drew over email, but I'll say that Drew's been my research partner for the last several years. And so that, what that means, Don. And
a friend of a friend is a friend, and I understand that. So it's a deep honor for me to know you.
Yes. And Kurt is a new partner, relatively new, and he's guiding us with our podcast. And he has a lot of background in ontological inquiry also.
Beautiful. Good to meet you also.
Great to meet you.
Yeah.
So first of all, what I want to say is that Don, well, is it okay if I call you Don, or would you prefer that I call you? It's okay. All right.
Or you could just say Quattro, like they do here in Mexico.
Yeah, Miko.
Yeah, it was an issue maybe 28 years ago, with family and everything. I was a maid relative of the Oglala Lakota Teoshpae, and I didn't use the name, and the whole story, but now people will ask me, well, so tell me about, and then I get into the topic of worldview, and it opens doors, so, but I'm equally proud of my Irish name, so either way.
Well,
But for the viewers, probably, since all my books of at least the last 10 of the last 24 are FourArrows, maybe it's better to say, FourArrows, just so that they can make that reference if they come in the middle of our presentation.
Okay, good. I'll try, and when I get it wrong, correct me.
I know.
Brain pattern is there. So FourArrows and I met over 20 years ago. When I had the good fortune to hire him to be a part of the faculty at Northern Arizona University. And we did amazing work, stirring things up, as we are prone to do. And we discovered a lot along the way, as we always do when we're trying to foster change. And it was a very exciting and challenging, and in some ways disappointing time within the Colonial University. And but I have such fond memories of us presenting together at conferences, and just stopping by your office and having chats, and going to Mexico together, right? When I was building that house on the beach. And FourArrows was just an authentic partner in everything that I was up to, and I was a partner in everything he was up to. And so what I want to say for the people listening is that you are a skilled horse whisperer. You're a persistent author with several books published. You're a persistent activist, and you're a persistent jazz musician, and a general Renaissance man, I guess I would say, right? And but it's so fascinating to me to have traveled with you, and then to find ourselves in very different spaces, and yet, as I read your latest book, find such common concerns, such common references. I had just discovered the Wedico virus, so when I read about it in the book, I was like, oh, okay. Right. But I would just say that it's really a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you.
And thank you for all the support from day one, from when you headhunted me from Oglala Lakota College, and I went only because my wife had a tough time there, right? Because I didn't want to leave, but it was perfect for that. But your support and your anti-hegemonic, your counter-hegemonic work and support of Indigenous peoples over the years has been just courageous and amazing.
Thank you, Don. I mean, FourArrows. It's it's only been in the last several years that I've actually discovered the enormity of the contribution that Navajo and Hopi students made to my life. I mean, I knew that working with them years ago made a difference, but I didn't understand the extent of it until some recent writing I've been doing, that they really altered the course of my life, and invited me to discover so many things that I never would have discovered otherwise, or I don't think I would have. Who knows? In terms of our conversation today, I'd like to ask you, I don't think I've ever asked you this question. I'd like to ask you something that showed up as I was reading the latest book. And that is, I'm curious about your early experiences with transformation. Like what kind of encounters did you find yourself in early on that kind of, as you look back now, you could see set the stage for your willingness to continue to discover for the rest of your life, right?
Well, that's a deep question. And, I'll try to be brief, but probably going all the way back to my early childhood. I had a father who had done 37 combat missions in World War II, was an alcoholic, died at age 52. And I sort of got a pathological passion for helping people reach their potential. I say it was pathological because it came from that early childhood trauma. I've worked on the pathology of it, which probably fired this radicalism in me that got me in a lot of trouble. I think I've tolerated it in a way that has allowed me to modify it over the years and be more diplomatic. But then from there, it was my own experience in the military and the Marine Corps. I left the Marine Corps on an honorable discharge as an officer, and had a chip on my shoulder about the lies of Vietnam. So I took it out on whitewater rafting and kayaking and wild horse breaking and all those, rock climbing, etc. Had a near-death experience on the Rio Orique here in Mexico, trying to be the first person. I was a firefighter at the time, working on my PhD in health psychology. And I invited my partner, Dave Carr, who was we were using these inflatable things. We call them rubber duckies. They weren't the good quality, boats that we have now. And I said, nobody's ever done this Rio Orique. And he said, yeah, there's a good reason for it probably, And I said, well, let's be the first, right? And so, you can read that in Primal Awareness or go on YouTube to The Shaman's Message and see the whole story. But I did have a near-death experience that was transformative. As the University of Virginia's Perceptual Studies program has a lot of case studies that duplicate what I felt, and had a vision. In fact, in my book, The Authentic Dissertation, I tell a story about my vision. My dissertation was based on it for my second doctorate at Boise State University. And my research faculty, when I was waiting for his results, to see if he was going to pass me, it said, this is either brilliant or bullshit. See me in my office. And although I passed, it took him 2 years to write me a letter after the book was published to say, okay, it wasn't bullshit. I apologize, right? Because who in the academy allows a vision to be the primary source, right, of research? So that was probably the most transformative. It changed me in ways that I talk about in the video and in the book. But 15 years after that experience, I read that the Raramuri people, the Indians who saved my life by showing us the way out of this 8,000-foot deep canyon, I read about their plight and the drug cartels and the women being raped and the forced confiscation of the Barranca land so they could grow opium poppies instead of beans. And I told B, I said, I got to go back. These are the people who saved my life. And she said, what are you going to do? You can't fight the drug cartel. I said, no, but I can go back as a writer. So I got contacted the Smithsonian, got a hold of Edmund Bustia and Goldman Environmental Award, Indian, and they sent me on a trek, a very difficult trek. You'll see in the video for three days into where the Rarotonga Cimarron people are, that no influence by Western culture, and they were struggling. And what I saw there and learned from these people still living in caves was, it just confirmed, everything of what I thought life should be: the happiness, the joy, the community, and it confirmed the vision, which I won't go into detail with, but of the 15 years before. And so I did my dissertation, and then the spirits had me immediately. The first call I got was Oglala Lakota College to come and be the dean of education. The first thing they told me was, look, we know you got some storified Cherokee in you that your parents and your aunts have talked about. But look, this is not a Dances with Wolves thing, And then they gave me a rundown on what was happening, right? And the program had been uncredited by the DECA, the Department of Cultural Affairs in South Dakota. And we put it on back into fantastic shape, and that kind of stuff. And so I learned then from the pocket there, and I became very involved with, keeping in mind, going back to the Navajo. I've got like 12 Navajo students now, and getting their doctorates. And when I first came, it was one of the reasons I came here. After, I quit my tenure at just after I got it at NAU. And because they graduated more Indigenous doctorates than any school in the world back in the time. And so my students are telling me that here, the Navajo Nation, the largest in the United States, they were telling me 70% have lost their language, lost their commitment, their knowledge of the ceremonies, and a large percentage of them are Christianized and don't want to and don't like them. And now they're telling me 80 to 85%, right? And so I've come to realize that there's a distinction between the place-based knowledge that we have to fight for, that those people around the world. I was just with the Kogi Mamas of Colombia. We've got to fight for them. They're on the front lines. But we can't own that, because you have to know the language fluently. You have to know the ceremonies fluently. You have to have been there for multi-generations to understand the flora and fauna and the stories and the mythologies. And so I don't talk about that much. I honor it. I fight for it. What I talk about is the in common concepts that each of these great, diverse, and very uniquely different cultures have in common. And that's what I call worldview. Mm-hmm. And that's what the book is about. And the University of California, Berkeley's Science Center for the Greater Good selected it as one of the top 15 science books for 2022. So science, and the UN has invited me to speak in 2 weeks. So now we're looking at worldview as a science. And so that's, I think, the transformation that I had on the Rio Ulrich, and the following years and the follow-up and the research I did at university really convinced me that there is a proven approach to living life in a good way, not to romanticize it, which is the worst thing you could do. Yeah. But proven. And the largest study ever done, forgive my enthusiasm on this, but the largest study ever done was the United Nations Biodiversity Report of 2019. And if you go and look at my article in The Nation, it's called "The Media Missed an Important Message." It's on you can find it on YouTube, in the UN Biodiversity Report, because 7 times in that report it said, and each time I saw it, I went, how come nobody's talking about this? Where indigenous worldview, and they use that phrase, exists, these extinction rates are severely reduced or absent entirely. And so now I'm a founding advisor with a group called proven sustainable. And I really strongly urge your audience to look at it. It's about, I think we've got 22 contemporary Indigenous cultures and lots of education about what they did that proves that, you know, this is not a thing of the past only. And in fact, we just got a trademark for the name, so Coca-Cola can't use it, right? And that kind of thing. And so I really believe that if we begin to look at worldview as something that every creature on earth owns, unlike the place-based Indigenous knowledge, and we honor both, but we start re-indigenizing ourselves to a place where there are no people anymore who know those things, then maybe we have a chance. And you know, I'll close with one of my little sayings. Until, you know, the so-called environmentalists can refer to natural resources as relatives and really deeply mean it, we don't have a chance of turning this around.
Well, and that's a great place to ask my next question. So part of what I experienced as I was reading the book was, for me, it was like reflecting on things that I had experienced before, but discovering new things at the same time, right? And the conversation because my focus is really ontological inquiry and pedagogy. How do we engage forms of pedagogy that evoke ontological inquiry? So people have traumatic experiences like you described with your childhood, right? And it took me a while, but everybody doesn't turn them into a process of discovery of new ways of being and acting as a human being, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody doesn't turn that into a commitment to the world, right? And so as I was reading your book, I was reflecting on, and hearing you today, I was reflecting on the, Ann Wilson Schaef wrote a book, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, 15, I don't know, about when society becomes an addict. And there's so many people that have written books about the addictive nature of our worldview that we've inherited, right? And so my question becomes, how do we, at the university, how do we interrupt that? And how do we invite students to discover for themselves? Because the knowledge the knowledge alone won't carry the day, right? And so at the end of your book, when you talk about trances and fawn, now I'm forgetting the other word. I know I've read about that before, but I never got
cat fawn, yeah.
Yes, cat fawn. I never got it till I read this book. I just kind of skipped over it somehow. But a lot of what you wrote about there reminded me of experiences I've had with ontological inquiry and coaching, where people have taken me back to the earlier event, right, and asked me to look at what happened and what I made it mean, and how that, in effect, how those brain patterns are running me in the present. So I started wondering about, are there other ways of accessing? So I saw a trance as being somewhat akin to poetry provoking discovery, right?
It could be. I mean, that's it's ceremony, and poetry can be a form of ceremony. Yeah. Indigenous cultures that I've studied, and I've studied so many, and have lived with so many that are still living the old ways. I see them doing hypnosis, self-hypnosis, group hypnosis, without knowing the terminology or brainwave frequencies or whatever. It was natural. It's natural in animals. I learned it from wild horses. Yeah. And so I think the academic ontological research, what you described is, I think, kind of unique, but generally, it's about what are the characteristics and traits of how we are being in the world. Whereas worldview as a science, as opposed to ontology, because they're so similar in not so many ways, is really about what you're getting at with the living poetry. It's really about what are my most fundamental beliefs, not cultural beliefs, not religious beliefs, not what my dad said to me.
Yeah.
What is those things, as I will show, are part of the metacognitive analysis we've got to do. But worldview goes deeper. And worldview is, even starting with Kant's idea of it being an intuition of the world and going to Robert Redfield out of the University of Chicago, who says there was only two worldviews, which proves itself when you look at debates. They always talk about, is it materialistic or spiritual? Is it anthropocentric or material? It winds up being the two worldviews, dominant and kinship. Sometimes I'm sorry, I name it indigenous, because that turns people off thinking it belongs to a group. I did that for a lot of reasons, of respect, but we did choose kinship for the book. So getting to the reality of this is the definition of a worldview that I offer, that Coco Rivera and all the scholars are using, and Robert Redfield, is about what is my relationship with other humans, with non-human entities, which is, unfortunately, when you look up the word nature in a dictionary, it usually says everything but humans, right? But of course, we're part of it. But the other than human nature, what is my relationship with it? And then the afterlife, spiritual, metaphysical kinds of things, and getting deep into that worldview after the Enlightenment, when it got into before it got into Redfield's purview as sort of the father of social anthropology, it was really about stifling dialogue and really deep inner thinking, because it was science versus religion worldview, or religion versus religion worldview, or science versus science worldview kind of stuff. If you put in Amazon.com, put in the word worldview, 95% is about religions. But the academy now, and clinical psychology, I was just invited to write an article for the General Psychology Review on decolonizing Western psychology. And if we go deep enough, we realize that we don't really know what we believe deeply that we haven't just been told from somebody. And so the exercises that come from the 40 worldview precepts, which are scientifically and researched very well, that show, generally speaking, the dominant worldview is materialistic. Now, that doesn't mean that all four of us, we believe we don't emphasize spirituality, or that what it really means is that even if deeply we can stop ourselves and somebody asks us, no, I'm not a materialistic person, I'm really spiritual. Then you say, well, let's talk about your job. Let's talk about your social group. Let's talk about your sports club. And pretty soon they go, wow, I see, maybe I'm not walking the talk, and that's what we mean by worldview manifestations with these precepts. And that's why it's got to be looked at as a continuum, not a good, bad. It's about the union of the opposites. And that's so crucial. Many good liberal faculty get really mad at me when they see this worldview saying this is a rigid binary, FourArrows, because they rightfully know the danger of rigid binaries, the George Bush, you're with us or against us kind of idea. But I'm saying to them, brother or sister, you're kind of right, but you're seeing this through your binary dominant worldview, or else you would understand what it says in the preface. And what I'm trying to get across here is that the indigenous worldview is a non-binary worldview. It sees the cold, freezing winter without food, and the beautiful spring flowers and bountiful meat. It doesn't see one as good and bad. It's like all the mythologies of the most powerful mythologies are about twin heroes. and one's always solar and one's always lunar, one's always left-handed, one's always right-handed, one's always, and if we look at the traditional ones, no matter how difficult their relationships, they are in partnership to figure things out and act. Now jump into 9,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, we've even changed as a solar dominant society of humans. We've even changed our mythologies. Romulus and Remus, Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Castor, and it goes on and on. Everybody knows Hercules. He was the solar twin. He could take a broadsword and go through an anvil. But nobody knows the lunar twin, Iphicles, who couldn't do that, but he could throw a nylon scarf up in the air and cut it 6 times with this amazingly sharpened knife, right? And so we, of course, Ian McGilchrist, the great psychiatrist, I'm mad at him for his 2,500-page book because he never mentions Indigenous worldview. He applauds Western philosophy, but he does get what's wrong with the world and what needs to be happening. It's just that he puts it into brain hemispheres. If you've read his work, he's just saying the left brain is leading us and it should not be the master. The right brain should be the master. And so it's all about brain. So there's something to that you gotta look at, but 2,500 words and not talking about worldview precepts and the fact that for 99% of human history, people were in balance, and with this. So I won't go into critiquing Ian, but so I think to answer your question more specifically, if people sit down with a metacognitive approach that says, okay, I got this problem in life or at my work or with my inability to reach my full potential or with what's happening to the world, and I'm going to look at this chart to see if really going deeper is going to make a difference. And then they start going down the list. Well, you can't pick and choose like you might do in a Bible. You got to look, okay, non-hierarchical is the first one versus hierarchical. So, okay, I can see this idea of a more non-hierarchical world, and I think I'm pretty egalitarian. And you start to get there. And so you're looking at it as a continuum, because even the Lakota, who were a matriarchy and very egalitarian and non-hierarchical, buffalo hunts, they became very hierarchical, right? So we've got all this kind of these interesting complexities, but now you say, okay, I'm going to start working on non-hierarchy. And I just wrote a whole chapter for that. And just on that one precept and what the world and what the animals do and all, like the mutual aid of Peter Kropotkin, instead of the survival of the fitness misinterpretation of Darwin. Well, now you can't just say, oh, God, I'm going to be non-hierarchical. You got to look down the list of the other 39. Are you non-hierarchical, but you come back and treat your wife badly because you have a low respect for women? Are you non-hierarchical, but you lead with the head instead of the heart? Are you non-hierarchical, but you don't see sentience in plants and ants? So we've got to get this consistency, which is a very practical exercise for almost any age. I had my 9-year-old grandson here for 2 weeks doing it and applying it to surfing. So once you got that, you say, whoa, okay, I got to work on moving more and really deeply believing in these things. But you can't do it with willful determination. This is where the trance comes in. So now you got this, and you say, and then you look over at the dominant side and say, okay, to some degree, I'm materialistic. I am, and I'm okay, but where am I on the continuum with this? And once you say, okay, this is where I want to be. If we could get to that place, which everybody ultimately does get to, this is where I want to be. If we could get there, people wouldn't be polluting. You wouldn't be killing your relatives. Maybe you would kill them, but you'd be doing it with respect, like hunting for somebody, or darn it, I'm sorry, I don't want to kill this rattlesnake, but it's my little baby puppies are here. It's under the porch, and you do ceremony and you do all this stuff. Well, now at that point, that willful determination is not going to be enough. That cognitive, this is right. This is the right way. This is what we're saying all over the place. We got to do this. We got to clean our water. that's when you use something that all three Abrahamic religions say is of the devil. That's the hypnosis. That Hollywood has mischaracterized. But, my book, Prentice Hall published in 1991, Patient Communication for First Responders, was banned because someone said this should be used only by licensed physicians who were certified in hypnosis. It just got published by Routledge with my doctoral student who's a paramedic. And they also wanted to take hypnosis out of the title. But if you put in emergency communication at the hypnotic communication at the emergency medical setting, you'll see it just came out yesterday. So what that is about is naturalistic. Whatever a paramedic is saying to a patient, it's hypnosis. They don't have to hypnotize them, because during the first hour of trauma, most of us, if we have fear, become hyper-suggestible, the communication of a perceived trusted authority figure. So, for example, Kurt, you could be driving home, and God forbid that you come in an accident. Somebody could be in a squashed Volkswagen, say the young lady, and she's hemorrhaging, and you can't open the door because it's crushed. If you spoke with authority, especially if you say, this is Dr. Hitler, if this is, give a little bit of sense of authority and say, look, the worst is over, young lady. Things are being made ready at the hospital. The ambulance is on its way. Also, the firefighters will be here to open this door. You're hemorrhaging right now, though, and we have to stop that. So when I count to 3, I want you to go ahead and stop it. 1, 2, 3. During the first hour, before old programs take over, 90% of patients will use, like a yogi does, they will use their own autonomic nervous system power of belief and imagination, and their bleeding will stop, right? And now, when I wrote the book in 91, I didn't have internet. I didn't have a lot of research to support stopping bleeding and lowering blood pressure and all the things. In this book, for the revision of it, we put all that in there. So Indigenous people, they do this. They've always done this without knowing the details. I was a clinical hypnotherapist and vice president of the Northern California Society of Clinical Hypnosis. I taught it at UC Berkeley, and I was in practice. And I could get somebody with a phobia that had a near drowning accident, couldn't get into a bathtub. I could get them into a deep lake that afternoon. Eventually, I was sitting in a hot tub in Marin County, place of hot tubs, and with a dear friend, Dr. Howard Tice, a Jungian psychologist. And he was telling me about a patient that he's had for 3 years that has fears. And I said, 3 years? I said, Howard, send her over to me. I'll put her in my samadhi tank. I'll hypnotize her to put her in my samadhi tank. We'll get her out in the lake that afternoon. He said, no, man. He says, that's why I don't use hypnosis. You know how much money I've made off of her in 3 years? And good guy, good-hearted guy. I quit the business and started, ultimately as I got into indigeneity. So now I teach it to people. I'll do it for them the first time so it's easier, so they can feel it and understand it and see it be proved. But then I'll give them, and I teach in all my books, in the Cat Fawn Connection books. By the way, cat is hypnosis. Cat is concentration, activated transformation. And my vision on the trail coming up, we had to stay in a cave right to get out of the river. It was the only place we could get out of the river because the canyons went straight up. And the river kept rising, and we were up on a little sort of ledge way up at the top of the cave thinking we were going to drown when an onça walked over us in the middle of the night. Onça is a rare mountain lion in Mexico. And David was in front of me. We're like a couple of kids. I went, Jesus, David did a friggin' mountain lion just walk over us. And then David, smarter than me, he said, yeah, but he didn't come back. There must be a way out of here. And that's how we escaped, right? And then on the trail, there was a Murray Indian young man, maybe in his 19, 18. who kept showing up when we got lost. We'd get to a series of barrancas with 3,000-foot drops with no clue of where to go. He would show up, mark a trail, and he must have gone 50 miles. You know, they're known for being runners. The Tarahumara is how we refer to him. And he must have come back and forth forever. Well, one day we saw a young one that wasn't the guy helping us carrying a dead baby deer, a fawn. And the feet of the fawn were bleeding. He had run it down. He had run a deer down and then conked it to bring it back to his community for food. Well, as we were trying to get out of the canyon after my near-death experience, I had a dream, a vision, and the cat and the fawn, the mountain lion and the fawn, turned into neon light saying CATFAWN. Long story as to how I came up with that, but fawn was a miniature of what I've done in this book. It's kind of consolidating 4 or 5 or 6 of the worldview precepts under the fear for F, authority for A, words and their sacredness and honesty for the W, and nature. And so if you look at the worldview precepts, you'll see that fear, authority, words, and nature really are addressed in maybe 11 of them, I think. But I would tell people, even back in those days, what are you afraid of? You got a problem with the wife, you got a problem with the job, you got a problem with this, or you're working for somebody that's, you're an organization, or you're an activist. What's the fear that you have? Because you can only control your own self-help that relates to any of this. Fear? I don't know. Oh, come on. There's a fear there somewhere. Well, I'm a little concerned about, okay, good. Let's get into where'd that come from? On whose authority? Now we're into authority. On whose authority? Well, it's something my dad told me when I was 4. Well, you're in hypnosis for the first 5 years of life, and that's why you can learn so many languages, right? And most of our problems today, most of our mental illness comes from the first 5 or 6 years. So it's there, but also trauma can cause it. Because of the phenomenon we're talking about, right? So, okay, well, wow. Okay, so who is the authority because you're looking at and once you decide, okay, and what words do you say? You know, when I was doing therapy, I had a man several times, or a woman who was obese. And I'd say, okay, what do you say to yourself when you look naked in the mirror? Well, I'm fat. I said, well, let's make words sacred. Let's not look at the Kipling's idea that the most powerful drug. Let's look at them as sacred vibrations. What's really true, as best as you can say true. And I'm a big believer in Parker Palmer's definition. Truth is an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and discipline. You really can't stand on top of the table and say it, but you know it when you see it or don't. And so, this person in 5 minutes, you start to, I see a beautiful man who has too much adipose tissue on his body for optimal health. So, yeah, bingo. Now we can go to work, right? Then you go from words to nature. So you've got the taking care of the fear problem, or not taking care of it, but identified the fear, the authority, what words are being used. I had a guy, big rich guy in San Francisco, called me up when I was in Marin County, sweated profusely every time he started to go to a meeting. I said, well, what do you say to yourself before you go in? I don't know. I look at the time. I say, I have to go to the meeting. I said, I'll make an appointment with you, but from now on, until you come next week, just say I want instead of I must or I have to. He said, yeah. A few days later, I think 5 days later, he cancels the meeting and tells my secretary, I think he hypnotized me on the phone. What do I owe him? And so words are that sacred, right? And right now we're in a world of post-truth. We're in a world of utter deception. And then the last one is, what have I learned from whatever nature besides me I can find? The grass coming up out of the sidewalk. Wow, what can I learn about that? I can learn about that. What about the ant? What about the ants that are doing this? What about, and what have I learned that relates to this, right? And once you get that, you look at the worldview precepts and how they're different. All right. Fear, dominant worldview, we avoided at all costs. Authority, almost anybody but us. Words, say it, whatever it takes to get through and be successful and win. Nature, it's utilitarian, only humans count. Now you go to the indigenous worldview, all right? Fear, opportunity to practice a virtue, courage, humility, honesty, etc. And authority, I'll listen to elders all day and for their advice. But the only authority, and I've seen this over and over again, is honest reflection on your own lived experience. That's why the hierarchies where we did have them in like in Hawaii, they were all reverse hierarchies. They did something wrong, hey, you're fired, right? So then you got words. The English, all the European languages are noun-based, so it's much easier to concretize and lie. Indigenous languages, you can't say what kind of a tree that is unless you know if the wind is blowing and there's a bird in it and what time of year it is. But still, the honesty was so important. Nature was our teacher, right? So that's usually a 2-week presentation I just gave you, but so.
You're muted, Carolyn. No, still muted.
You're still on mute, huh?
Yeah, there you go.
Now, what I was going to say is at some point my daughter was driving me back from Utah, back to New Jersey, and I was listening to the book, and I can't say exactly where, because it was like I was moving in and out of being present to what I was hearing, but I was still hearing it. And at some point there was a realization that I had been captured with this fear about the loss of humanity on the planet. But the discussion in the book about nature had opened up this, and the discussion about death, both of those had opened up this new possibility, right? Of, well, nothing disappears, everything's energy, everything persists. I may not know how it's going to persist or what it's going to look like, but everything persists. I mean, I'm not going to disappear. And so there was a new space for my commitment inside that. But I see that this process of becoming, how do I say, connected to nature, I'm like at the very, very beginnings of that. And it's so interesting to imagine what that could make available on the one hand, and on the other hand, to see how we damage people. I mean, of course, that's there in the book, but we tease about my grandkids being free-range kids because they're outside every day, right? No matter if it's raining, snowing, whatever, and they don't even feel the cold anymore. I swear they forget to put their coats on, but they are so not afraid of nature, and so not afraid. They were never told all the things I was told as a child, right? Be careful. You're going to fall. You're going to break your arm, whatever it is. They're never told any of that. And it was such a stretch to imagine young people going out on vision quests, right? Because of what I've inherited, right? And so I guess I'm not sure what I don't know.
Well, I get it. I think I get it. And, and a couple of things. First of all, one of the things in the Indigenous Worldview Precept list is embracing the mysterious.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of courage. So when we do that, that's one place, because we can't, when we try to fathom the sentience of an octopus or a tree, we can read all the books on it and watch all the movies on it and go, oh my God, they're smarter than we are. But the mystery of it has to be part of that. All right. So then once you do that, then what you said about, I'm going to really convince myself that I am a spirit inhabiting body. My grandson is like, it's so cool. I mean, I almost want to cry when I think about it. It was just so cool how he gets that. And so those are the two key things that things go on. I was up at University of British Columbia just before the pandemic, maybe, I don't know, 3 years ago, whenever that was, at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction of Elaine Ross. And at the end of my presentation, which was something like this, student said, or teacher, I think it was, so Dr. Jacobs, I said, FourArrows. He said, oh, FourArrows, okay. Do you think that if enough of us can get this, we can turn things around? And it just came out of me. I said, no. And man, you can just see there's about 80 people, and they went from loving me to hating me in that second.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not saying I don't, that it's not possible. I just don't think it's probable from what I'm able to gather with my, kind of, whatever observations I'm able to make. I said, for me, it's actually a dangerous delusion to think that we're going to turn it around. And then they really went deep. All the hands went up. And I said, yeah, why are you here? You don't get royalties from your books. You donate them to causes, and why are you doing all this work, writing books and stuff like that? And this is what I said. I said, because I want to be a human being. And there was this silence. Well, I had just written a little pamphlet before this book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview, called Sitting Bull's Words for a World in Crisis. Just a little, really small little monograph. And that was what Sitting Bull said when a reporter asked him, way late before he was killed, how could you, when the buffalo were all gone, smallpox was wiping out everybody, you were singing your songs, you were writing the songs, you were sundancing no matter if you were on the run, your artwork, your generosity, even for the enemy, and on and on and on, the things that were really known about him. And that was his answer. I want to be a human being, right? Knowing that a human being is a spirit, like the ant and the tree, and with a unique purpose, etc. Right? And so that's where I got that. And Václav Havel, I came upon his quote, and I sometimes don't cite him. I should, but he says, hope is not the certainty of an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's the certainty that whatever you're doing is the right thing to do, regardless of the outcome. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been teaching that to people, and people are writing me and saying they feel empowered. Even this group, because I said that to the group, some of them have written me and saying, I'm able to do more activism. I'm not burning out when I see the failure of what I try to do. And so I think your question is brilliantly important, Carolyn, that this association and this alignment with nature, we have to embrace the mystery, the complexity. We have to say, all right, why do I think that ant is sentient, right? We can, we don't have we got a lot of our early childhood stories are animal stories, but not to the degree that the indigenous stories are, right? I'm doing a little deck of cards for Random House, and all I do is I have a little thing I have a picture of the animal, and then above it, just a brief what it does for the world, cleaning up and all that stuff. And then a little mythology from indigenous stories. And so the bat, for example, and I didn't know this. So I talk about the bat and how it cleans the mosquitoes and all that stuff. But the little story about how it came is so typical of what indigenous people around the world have always learned about, the importance of them as teachers. And what it was is the sun was coming up one day and got caught by a tree and couldn't come up. But all the animals that were hunting, and this is pointing out selfishness and greed and all these virtues, they said, oh, this is great. There's no sun. I can hunt longer. Some of them that were sleeping went, oh, this is great. I can sleep longer. But a few were going, this is not going to be good. We don't have sun. Plants aren't going to grow. We're going to freeze to death. And so those few came to the rescue of the son. One of them was a flying squirrel that could jump out of a tree and glide. And that squirrel crawled up and started chewing on the branch to free the sun. But because the sun was so hot, it burned his eyes out and it burned all his hair off. But he got the sun free. The sun came up and started to warm the world. And the sun said, look, you are the only animal that came to my rescue. What can I do for you? I said, well, I'm blind. That's one thing. I said, the other is, I fly from tree to tree, but it's not flying like the birds. So the sun said, bingo, it's done. That's how the bat came about. Isn't that fantastic? And so if we have these kinds of, these stories, and we can watch the tube and see the facts or read the book, The Secret Life of Trees, that helps. But no, we've got to live that. We got to live it. And so, it gets into the kind of proverbial thing, and the old lady just spends 3 hours trying to get the fly out the door. We don't have to go to the extremes, all that. We got to kill. Life eats life. So we kill everything. We're got things killing me now, and I'm killing things. It's not about that. It's about the 4R's: the respect, the relationship, the reciprocity, and the responsibility. And those 4 things is what the worldview will give us if we start practicing, re-embrace it, because it's in our DNA. Not as close maybe as some of the indigenous. Have you guys seen my little 2.5-minute video that UNESCO closed with? I would love to show it to you. And this ties into this because I'm on an international Fulbright scholar, and I was helping the Papua New Guinea indigenous people try to remember who they are, because they are contributing tremendously to the pollution, as are many people in the Congo. Same thing. The poverty, the oppression, all the things that have happened, they are becoming equal culprits in the problem. Unlike the few who are trying, that are in situations where they're able to fight against it and hold on to their old ways. So I said, well, let's make a video for them so they can see the beauty of their worldview, to give them a confidence that they are the answer for the whole world, giving them their self-esteem back, right? So most people who watch the video don't know that story, and I haven't told it to hardly anybody. I think you might be the only ones, because it looks obviously that this is for non-indigenous peoples, right? Keeping in mind this, if your readers or your listeners are saying, well, I'm not going to misappropriate indigenous wisdom, and I don't want to teach indigenous worldview. Read my article. You can find it on YouTube, published by Critical Education out of the University of British Columbia, called "The Indigenization Controversy: For Whom, By Whom." And in short, Fool's Crow is what I represent. Fool's Crow said, anyone who does not share this medicine doesn't know the medicine. Now, do we have to have respect and understanding for the angry indigenous peoples who are saying, hey, you've stolen everything from us, don't steal our spirituality, right? No, of course we do. We have to understand it. Indian country is divided on this. But if we make this distinction between place-based knowledge and worldview, I think we can get past it, right? And so, anyway.
I should ask Drew. Drew, you look like you have something to say.
I always, there's tons of stuff. Really extraordinarily rich. 4Arrows, and I wanted to. I'm fascinated with and always on the hunt for the transition of a being who has lost touch with the possible being that they are. And them transitioning to awakening to whatever that is. In this, we can call it indigeneity, like that, the grounding possibility of our existence is right here and right now. The waters of life are right here, but I'm cut off from it in some way. And you've said many things about, kind of practices or things that could be done, but I guess I'm always there in my classroom looking for maneuvers to trick, invite, to cajole, my students to discover that that they're right in the midst of the glory and majesty and the beauty of being itself, right? So I'm that's what I'm looking for, is like, what is it? I got that we should, there's a should there. We got to do this, but how? Like, that's the thing I keep coming back to is how to engage in the pedagogical practices that would bring this about for myself, as any of the listeners might, or and I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. And I would say that one session of clinical hypnosis, doing what I was talking about with fear removal, is an example that can be modified creatively in any classroom for any individual. And that is, first, identify as best you can the source of the reason you're not transformed as you are. You don't feel like you are the being that you can be. And that gets into the fun. And then once you talk about that and you start to say, well, I didn't realize I had that fear. And I didn't realize that my whole life I've been following what Grandpa said, or the words I'm using aren't as true as they could be. And I certainly haven't been paying attention to nature as anything but something that is there to use for firewood. And so once that cognitive process starts and people start to self-know themselves, which is the ancient proverb, then if they have access to an in vivo exposure, okay, what is that? I've got these realizations. What can I do to go out and, with the new idea, see how it feels when I go to the party or when I go home to talk with my boss? And if they're not ready to do that, which they probably won't be, then you go, well, I don't know that this is deep enough in your convictions. Why don't we get it into your cells and your synapses and your imagination? Einstein says imagination is more powerful than knowledge. If I put a 2x4 on the ground and ask you to walk across it, you can do it probably if you got fair balance. If I raise it 10,000 feet in the air and there's no wind, you're probably going to fall, even if for $1 million, but you won't do it for less, right? So we got to teach this hypnosis thing and self-hypnosis. All athletes use it. I had a woman who was 265th in the world, Natalie Mulhausen, and she's the world champion now in fencing. And I used teaching her self-hypnosis, putting her into fear experiences like we did in Cuba. And I walked out on the 6th floor of her window, and because my room was next door, I knocked on her window, and she just shocked her so much. I said, "Come on, we're going to do the hypnosis out here." No, I'm okay now. I'm ready for it. Because she had a Chinese competitor coming up. She was scared to death. Though I knew I had to get something radical in there. But anyway, so get in touch with people. Say you have this power. You whatever disabilities you have or whatever background you have, you are a unique creature, just as the plant in your garden, just as in a positive way. And so let me teach you self-hypnosis. So simple. You can get a pendulum. I can use my necklace, but just hold it between. Here's one right here. I got them all over the place for people. So look, there's something Edmund Jacobson in 1939 got tennis players hooked up with wires all over the place, going to a box, EEG machine on the court, and they would do their best serve, and he would record what muscles operated. Then he'd take him and put him in his laboratory on a table, hooked up again. So I want you just to imagine hitting that ball. Bingo. All the same muscles would show up, and he called those ideomotor neurons. Well, people have played with Ouija boards and pendulums forever, but they don't know this, right? So if I take this right here and I put my elbow on the table, I'll put it on my knee for now, and I move it in a little circle. I don't know if you can see it. if I move it in a little circle so I can see what that looks like, now I can imagine it. So now, and you saw my fingers move on that. Now I'm just going to imagine it going in a circle. There it started. Bigger. Now, all that means is I went into a lower brainwave frequency, a little, I feel it right now, swallowing, from my thinking beta to maybe alpha, maybe a little deeper. And I believed in an image, because that's all hypnosis really is. I mean, we know from the journal Nature that required somebody to do a test 3 times before they publish it, that if I flash different colored cards in front of you after hypnotizing you to see the black card is yellow, you'll say yellow just like that, but places in the brain that light up will show that you're actually seeing yellow. So this is a very powerful phenomenon, but we don't need to understand all that. All we got to do is do it. Well, why do we do this? Well, if this is telling you that you just put yourself into a light trance, you don't have to pay me $300 an hour. At least that's what it used to be. You just do it, because it tells you that you just went into a light trance that you could have your appendix taken out with, as I did, right? Or walk on fire, right? And if it stops, then you're just imagining walking on fire. You're not doing it, right? So you just double task. So you have a previously, when I, like Drew, whatever, like your student or on your own life that you want to transform, put that into a sentence or two with positive phraseology, so that the words that are the most powerful stand up. Like you wouldn't tell somebody, you're not going to die, right? Because those are the words of imagine. You would say, yeah, we're going to get you to live, whatever. So you write it down, memorize it. Now get your pendulum. Now what you're going to do is you're going to get this thing going in a circle and double task. Now switch over to imagining when I go and talk to the boss, I'm going to have respect. I'm going to understand their mistakes. I'm not going to make them feel bad if I can help it, but I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say the words as beautifully as I can. If it stops while you're imagining your respectful conversation with your boss, like I just said, if it stops, then you're not doing hypnosis, because you've got to be in this lower brainwave frequency. This is just telling you that, right? Clinical hypnotherapists hate it when I teach this, right? They use it also, though, but they use it, like I could say something, you want to really quit smoking? And this would be yes or no, and this would be, this would be no, and this would be yes. They may say, yes, I really do, but the pendulum might say no. I mean, that's, it goes deeper, right? And, but I'm using it for a different reason. I'm using it to teach people how to do it. With the hypnosis, and they imagine that, then the in vivo exposure is more likely to work, is the point. It's a process, and it's studying this worldview chart, going, wow, how far am I here? Because all of these things are affecting what I believe about myself, what I believe about the world, and why I believe it. And the science of worldview that I'm going to be presenting at the United Nations on in a couple of weeks, this science of worldview is key to education for change and sustainability. And I guess that can be my closing thought, except I would love to hear from Kurt if you have any question.
Well, I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to first just appreciate everything that you've generously contributed in this conversation, 4Arrows. It's just been a delight. And I'm also want to say how much I am loving and appreciating Restoring the Kinship Worldview.
Thank you.
And a couple things that I'm really struck by, and I'm struck by everything in the book. I mean, everything in the book, and I'm sharing about it relentlessly with everybody that'll listen. And I've got 2 things here that I've posted on my computer screen to keep in front of me all the time, which is, 1, laughter is the language of God, spirit, or the eternal. And getting connected to the sense of humor and the laughter in the Indigenous worldview is so precious.
Oh, it is so precious.
I just love it. And I love the excerpt from the Indigenous stand-up comic. I thought it was so great.
Yeah.
And then second, to be in balance is what to attend to. And I'm really struck by the difference between the dominant worldview, especially a Judeo-Christian worldview, which is always about good overcoming evil. And that everything in that worldview is good overcoming evil. There's heaven, there's hell, versus the Indigenous worldview of balance, which you referred to previously, and that what there is to attend to is finding that balance that nature is so adept at teaching us. So I don't have a question so much at this point, given we just have a few minutes left, other than simply to acknowledge the brilliance of the book and the conversation that you and Darcia have throughout the book. And again, just to appreciate the work that you're doing. I did love the video. I have just gotten back from a whitewater rafting trip in the Upper Tuolumne. And
Oh my gosh. I was the first to kayak Clavey Falls yeah. Oh my God.
It's beautiful falls. I mean, just really, really lovely. And I kind of reflected on you and your partner's adventure in the canyons.
Oh, I can't believe the Tuolumne has come up. It was my wife, before she was my wife, that was the first date.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. We went down and scared the hell out of her. I had to hypnotize her to go down it. But there's hot tubs along. It's a 3-day trip,
Yeah.
I didn't even know they were still using it.
Yeah.
Two things about
no joke. Clavey Falls is a serious.
That's right. We, for the first 2 years, we would walk around it.
Yeah.
And then one day, David and I was the guy who went down to the Rio for a week with me. David and I were looking at it, and we looked at each other, and we went, "Holy shit, we can do that!" And that was when we got afraid, because we knew we were going to try it.
Right.
Well, I can claim that I was the first hard kayak.
Nice.
Go down it, but I never tell anybody the second part.
Which is?
As soon as I got through and avoided the big hole, I went up into a tree, and it took us an hour to get me out of it. That's the part I'm going to tell. So, just two things. One on the humor. I'm authorized by the Great Lakota Nation as a member of the Lakota Medicine Horse Tioshpaye to run lodges, and I do. I would like to close our presentation with a prayer, by the way, because we didn't open with one. But when I did lodges on Pine Ridge, no matter how serious or traumatic or sad the reason for the lodge was, I never came out without a sore stomach from laughing. The naturalness, even if somebody had just died from a terrible accident, somebody coming up with a story about him slipping on a banana peel or whatever, right? And so I found that when people come for healing to my lodge from the dominant worldview, that humor is natural, and I don't have that ability either. So I have, over the last 10 years, a policy: bring a joke, and in between doors,
I love that.
We tell jokes, and it starts to change.
Yeah,
Right. And then there was the second thing that you said, and now I've forgotten.
Balance, finding balance.
I just told B this the other day. I said, I've watched, while she was gone in Oregon for a week. I said, I watched all kinds of indigenous documentaries on primitive peoples and stuff like that. And I said, it struck me in like 5 of them that I watched, the translators said that the problem in the world is our loss of balance. And also each one of them said, and these are tribes I hadn't even heard of, each one of them said, but for the first time, we've thrown nature out of balance. And whoa, that just kind of really, if I had hair anymore, I would have
Right.
raised the hair on my head. So allow me to close, if I may, with, first of all, great appreciation for the energy that across these vibes on a screen are touching my heart from all four of you. This words I'm going to say are kind of untranslatable, but they just are saying to the four directions, to the great mysterious thing, to Mother Earth, that we have to walk in balance. I'm going to say something I wasn't going to do before because of what you just said. And so it's all about Chankuluta, which is our word for red road, which is our word for walking in balance. And then there's one part in there that talks about our responsibility for helping everyone with health. So we'll do this, and then we'll you guys can close, and if you want to show a video, maybe you can put that in you know, it's where I was talking about my university. Otungashila wakantaka namakompo nata tewa topa unshimaka hituwa yankelo. Hear us. Oyate oyasin chanko luta ochnamane oichakya. Chanko luta hecheha ihani la koichwan tunkashi la kiksuye. Oyate oyasin unchiwi chalapo no oichakya po hechowitozani washte unwa piktelo. Mishante tawo ogalake, not the pages they pay. Takoyasa. We're all related. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
for
FourArrows.
Stay in touch, Caroline.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.